So we've been, really briefly, 10 seconds background on our company. We've been around 10 years now. All of us come from the military intelligence or just national information security space. A lot of us are prior military as well. And when you're doing cybersecurity type of work and a lot of different facets of it for over 10 years, usually people ask, what are the trends? What are the things that you guys are seeing? And to sort of piggyback on what S.A. Dugan was mentioning a few minutes ago is the levels of sophistication are actually increasing, right? So it's not all bad news, right? You see a lot of Pollyannish, oh, you know, the sky's falling. Yes, there's still a lot of vulnerabilities out there, and the ones that we see specifically within the defense industrial base, that's really the kind of the point of this morning's discussion. So we'll be going over those. But if you're looking at an example like the SolarWinds breach, which everyone brings up, right? You had over 1,000 programmers and developers working on that over a long period of time. And now what does that tell you? That tells you that it's really expensive to go after a target that rich. And most likely it's going to be a nation state backing it up. So an example, everyone's heard of the water utility down in Florida that got breached a few months ago. And the only reason we heard about that one, and believe me, these things happen all the time. And the only reason we heard about this one is because the sheriff decided to hold a press conference soon afterwards. But the level and scale of these kind of attacks can actually be huge, right? So on, I don't know if anyone remembers, but on, I believe it was October 12th, the city of Mumbai, which is about 2/3 the size of the metropolitan area of New York City, but has more than 2 times the number of people in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. It went dark, and the entire infrastructure was breached. They have their ideas on who the nation state was, but whether you're a student in the subway or a worker in a high-rise building, all of your power and all of your connectivity was gone, in some cases up to 12 hours. That's a big deal. And some people thought that was probably a nation state test on a large commercial infrastructure. My point is, whether it's a small utility, water utility, of which I believe there are over 5,400 here in the United States, or you're one of the largest cities in the entire world, everyone's at risk, right? So even though it's getting more expensive to go after the big targets, what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis is the smaller targets are still leaving themselves vulnerable. And so there are things that can be done right now to make yourself less of a target. And the folks that are on the front lines of this every day are our audit and advisory services team, led by Colin Glover, who is our director, and one of our senior analysts, Alexi Johnson. So what they're going to go over today are some of the highlights of what we see within the defense industrial base. And when we started doing these, smaller webinars about 1.5 years ago, we did it in a fireside chat almost format, where they would ask each other questions and answer those questions, and people could come in from the audience and ask as well. And the format, yeah, it sounds very 1940s-ish, but the technology has been updated, but it worked then and it kind of works now. So with that, just so I'm sort of setting the stage so you know what to expect. With that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over and talk details over to Colin and Alexi if they're ready. Are you guys ready?
We are ready.
All right, I will go on mute and I will get off camera, and the floor is yours. But of course, we are here to answer any questions. If anyone has anything, feel free to send them our way. And that's kind of the point of this morning. All right, I'm out. Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Good morning to everyone. And thank you, Rob, for kicking it over to us. It's always a pleasure to have an opportunity to be representatives of Sera-Brynn and the work that we do, and just having the opportunity to share with others in the industry some things that can be done to kind of help improve the cybersecurity posture across the country. So it's always a welcomed opportunity for Colin and I to be able to do this. Without further ado, just jumping in, the topic today, cybersecurity in the defense industrial base. And as Rob mentioned, we're going to be talking kind of about some of the trends that have been noticed, things that have been a problem throughout the throughout implementation of NIST 800-171, things like that. We're not going to specifically talk compliance, but just some of the things that we've seen that are issues. So in doing so, we're going to be looking at a few different things, where we've been, where we are, where we're going, and what we need to do to get there. So first off, who are we? I think Rob covered it very well, so I'll just, flip through this slide fairly quickly. But this is who we are, a cyber risk management company with an ultimate goal of helping the industry to create a secure, compliant, and cost-effective environment. So if that is you, of course, feel free to reach out to us. Now, as the FBI mentioned during their introductory talk, so we will not be the dead horse here, but I believe it's clear that foreign actors have been consistently working to compromise and have been successful in a lot of cases in compromising U.S. defense contractors. As a matter of fact, the Navy published a report, and in their report, you can see the items that are highlighted in yellow. It's a pretty damning report. Basically, it seems clear that we're in trouble because we're not doing some simple things that need to be done to ensure that we are appropriately managing cybersecurity risk within the defense industrial base. But if you notice a big word that stood out here, we're under siege. This is from the 2019 Navy Internal Review that was published to the Wall Street Journal. And things like system has demonstrably failed, adversaries, clear statements of intent. The DIB was not adequately informed of the cyber threat. But the biggest thing that's listed here is there is a limited understanding of the actual totality of losses. Many times, you can quantify when you have a physical inventory of everything and you can count. I have 15 items and you lose 5 of them. You can quantify that. But when you're talking about the defense industrial base and programs ranging from very small scale military activities to very large scale military activities, it's very hard to quantify the actual total amount of loss. So in comes the DFAR and.
Hey, Alexi, I think I'm good now.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So, if we want to come back to the previous slide,
Absolutely.
I think what's not highlighted, and you don't have to flip back, but what's not highlighted is just the length of time. This is, I think everybody in attendance is aware, this is not a new thing. I recall being back on assessments and asking if how their cybersecurity was doing while I was in the government, and they would nod their heads and say everything was great, and then they would call me, 2-3 months later and say they'd been popped. This is not a new thing. This has been a long time coming, and the Navy's absolutely right that they have completely come after us for years. I think the key here is that, starting at the DoD or at the U.S. government level, and generally cybersecurity got tightened several years ago, and that flowed down to the primes. The big six, the big contractors of the world began tightening up their cybersecurity defenses, and the adversaries just continued to go down that supply chain. As it takes more resources to pop one place, they're just going to go down to an easier place. So it's the weakest link that is really going to be the primary target. Sure, you're going to have some big attacks occasionally, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be that weakest link that's going to get popped, and that's the concern. So I think we go on to the next slide.
Absolutely.
So, and these are a couple of reports. Our report from 2019 is on here on the end, and we'll talk about it a bit later. But the Inspector General from the DoD has analyzed the implementation of 252.204-7012, which was the original DFARS clause, not the original, but the DFARS clause that came out saying that contractors had to put in a certain level of cybersecurity. And then since then, so this came out 31 December 17, and so contractors should have been implementing some level of cybersecurity. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is in the most recent DFARS rule, if you go to the actual website and read the whole thing, when you get bored and want to take a nap, it quotes directly from the IG report. DoD contractors did not implement mandated system security requirements. Recommend DoD take steps to assess the ability to protect the information. I think our report, and we'll hit it again, really bears out the fact that contractors have not at all, that's not true. Many contractors have not taken these requirements to heart. This is still a work in progress across the board, and there's been plenty of places we've been where they're working on sensitive DoD projects that are just now getting started. And, there's some level of self-selection bias there. And the fact that if they're coming to us for help, it means they are taking this seriously because they're going to have to expend resources to do so. So for those companies that aren't reaching out, that aren't taking this seriously, these requirements are not being met yet, and it is likely it's going to be several years before we get there.
That's a great point that you make. First off, not speaking in absolutes, because you're right, there are some companies who are doing a very good job. But I think throughout the course of our work, we have discovered that there are some other companies who maybe need a little bit of nudging to work towards getting things done. So we published a report, and our report kind of showed some statistics regarding which controls are frequently not implemented in many cases. Would you care to elaborate on any specifics of those that you think are pretty major?
Yeah, so this is our report from 2019. This was our initial report. It was a lot of fun to put together. And I think we hit it somewhere else in here, but multi-factor has just been an issue implementing across the board. A lot of people don't want to do it for a lot of different reasons, and that becomes an issue. Flaw remediation, again, I think we'll hit it on a bit later, but flaw remediation, multi-factor, and user training are three of the top things that can be done to prevent a breach. And those are the top three things, or at least two of the three things that haven't been conducted. Another major one, and I wish Terry were here to talk with us, but testing your incident response plan. Whether or not they actually have an incident response plan is one thing, but then, to find it in a cupboard or looking up on your SharePoint during an incident, it's too late to figure out what you're supposed to be doing. And very, very few companies we've worked with, or organizations writ large, have actually gone through the process of understanding what they're supposed to do during an incident response. I saw an email to one of the companies I'm working with that a prime is now requiring they actually test their PKI certificate if they have an incident. So primes are getting more and more focused on this and proactive, which is a good thing. But still, there's a long ways to go with some of the fundamental cyber hygiene that we would want to see with all the companies we work with and across the defense industrial base. I think the big one, and Alexi, I know you love to talk about this, so we can hit on it if you want, is, 2019, no company we work with were 100% compliant. So Alexi, I'll ask you, with the DoD reporting requirements that have come out with SPRS, how do you feel about companies that say they've implemented all 110 controls?
I believe the title of our report was Reality Check, and I believe that would be what a lot of those companies need. I have spoken with a couple of companies, and typically when they say, oh yeah, we're at 100%, I can ask just a couple of simple questions, and typically it'll be something as simple as, inbound and outbound traffic, deny all, allow by exception. Most companies aren't doing that. They do it for inbound traffic, but outbound traffic, they just assume, oh, well, everything's blocked at the firewall, we're good. Except for when somebody sets up shop internally and starts talking over some ports that you typically wouldn't use in your environment. So not to go too far down, that rabbit hole, it's typically, the reality is, and not to play on words, the reality is that sometimes it's just people are more likely to be a little bit more kind to themselves when they're doing an assessment of what their environment looks like. And they may not look at it, from the standpoint of what an auditor would look at it from, because they're thinking, okay, well, we're good, and we can kind of say that this is good because of this. But there is a rule behind it all, and typically that's what you see. So I don't believe that there's a lot of malicious thought when they're completing their scores, but I believe there's a hefty level of misunderstanding of what the actual requirements are, and making sure that they can figure out how to appropriately meet these requirements. So all of these things that are not being implemented, obviously it has resulted in something, and in many cases it's resulting in a compromise of data.
Yeah, exactly. This came out in 2018, and many people have pointed to this incident as why the new programs are coming out. There was a serious breach. I think the numbers were, it's in the statement right there, 614 gigs of material relating to a closely held project known as Sea-Dragon, which is some crazy Navy program, as well as signals and sensor data, submarine radio room information. So this was a very significant breach that who knows what the long-lasting impact will be. And unfortunately, I don't have the details of how the breach occurred, but who knows, some things get misclassified. I've certainly run into that before, where some people think something should be classified and others don't, and it ends up being released. So it's these type of attacks that continue to happen outside of, or, is the root cause of why we're here talking about this. The importance can't be underappreciated. It's critically important to the national defense to protect this data appropriately.
I just want to mention there is a question that came in before we go to the next slide about getting a link to the study. We will make sure that we drop that in the chat section so that you will be able to have access to that, all who have not seen it and would like to do so. And now continuing on, a lot of the issues that have been found, you mentioned Terry, one of the primary guys involved in incident response. Typically, we found that it's been an implementation issue. Many times it's, I don't want to look at the pandemic, but it's a great example. My wife is a medical professional, and many times what we find is that after somebody has contracted COVID, the first thing they say is, oh, I wear my mask all the time. But if you would follow their life daily, you'll find that they don't wear their mask all the time. So of course, that's not to maximize or minimize what's happening with COVID, but I think it's a great example in similar fashion, because the question Colin asked is, people say that they're at 110. Well, quite frankly, if some of these controls have been implemented, some of the times the compromise level or the impact of the compromise could have been minimized greatly if they just had implemented maybe password complexity, or maybe password history, or having a secure baseline, or having audit logs and alerts set up so that they can be alerted to the presence of specific things that are happening in their environment. So if you're listening and you know somebody who's not implementing, or maybe they know somebody, today would be the day to start, because it doesn't really matter what you've done in the past. You can always start right now towards implementing all of these requirements, and it's going to help cybersecurity in the defense industrial base tremendously, one company at a time.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. We'll skip back just a bit, Alexi. Again, and this will come up everywhere, is multi-factor. I'm sure everybody here on the phone loves it, but having multi-factor everywhere you can put it is one of the best steps you can take. It's greatly helped. Password complexity, not to go to it, but I know SolarWinds, I saw just a headline. I didn't actually read the article, about the fact that one of the passwords used was 123 SolarWinds. They were blaming it on an intern, apparently. So that, things like that, ensuring that passwords are changed, ensuring that, it's the basic cyber hygiene. There's some ninja stuff out there where guys do some really incredible hacks that aren't going to be prevented with normal cyber defenses, but the 99% of it is going to 99% of the hacks are going to take advantage of a known exploit. I know there's a recent big hack where it's a ransomware attack, and then the ransomers are releasing the sensitive data for sale. So not only are they encrypting the data on the company side, but now they're selling the data on the market. Again, most ransomware attacks are going to take advantage of things like outdated systems. Not Petya, which was a huge attack, ransomware or not, that was based on attacking Windows 7 platforms and Windows XP, which are out of date. So it's those basic things that we should be doing that are leading to a majority of the breaches.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. And I think one of the things you just mentioned about exploits that already exist, that's where the flaw remediation comes in. When you can have an effective flaw remediation program a la patch management, it's always a good idea to continue to maintain your systems. And that's going to help prevent lots of attacks just by solidly patching your systems on a regular schedule. Absolutely.
Or again, when we do respond and there's no logging, it's going to be a long, unpleasant, expensive time. So,
absolutely.
Okay, I think we can move on.
So where are we today?
So this was and we borrowed this with permission. This was a survey done by a company called Verify. I believe, I forget when it was done, I think last fall. And this survey, they looked, it was a questionnaire they sent out to various folks and got some pretty cool responses. The requirements, again, the 50% of companies in the 5 to 10 million range said they were 171 compliant. Then that goes down towards, which is amazing that, you get greater than 1 billion. I think you just get more accurate. The under 1 million, again, super small numbers, and we'll hit on that a little bit later. Only 30% felt they were compliant with 171. 45% had an incident response plan. Very few people were on that self-assessed maturity. I'd be amazed to see anybody at the 5 level. That'd be really cool to see, unless they have an enclave. But again, I think this slide shows 3 years after they were supposed to be compliant, the majority of companies across all, size range were not compliant with 171. So I think all the numbers stay the same, or say the same thing, that the required cybersecurity just hasn't happened yet.
Well, for any of the participants who may have kids, this is an opportunity on this next slide for everybody to get a trophy, right? Not really. I say that in jest. We have improved. Based on our study. We found that implementation rate has risen from 39% to 53%. And while that's an opportunity to be excited, it's really an opportunity to continue to be worried because this slide shows implementation across the board, but it doesn't show whether or not it's multi-factor authentication, or it doesn't show whether or not it's not using a FedRAMP equivalent system, not showing whether CUI or any type of intellectual property or non-public information is being sent unencrypted. It captures in total that we have improved, but as you dive into the details, you begin to realize that there are really still some tough areas that people just have not implemented yet. And what are your thoughts there, Colin?
Well, I'm going to take the opposite approach. So we've worked with quite a few small businesses, and I worked with one particular, and over a couple of years, they went from a very, very low implementation rate to a very high implementation rate. Yes, they had to expend resources and capital to get there, but they did it. And it's a 22-person company, so it's not a big, large, complex organization. But they expended the capital and the resources to get there. So it's possible. I think it shows that this, people are taking it more seriously. They may not be taking it seriously enough yet, but there are pockets of companies with the proper motivation, and I think I'll hit it again later, but a lot of that motivation is coming from the primes. They are not, companies that don't have a strong relationship or strong support from their primes aren't doing it. It's the companies that are being pushed along by the larger contractors that have started implementing all the controls and showing that good cybersecurity posture. So, and I think we'll hit it more. It's really a forcing action with the DoD, with DFARS 19, 20, and 21. You know, companies are starting to pay attention. There is a forcing action, and I think that's helping people along. You know, I'm going to be interested to see what our numbers look like this year. I would expect them to continue to, we'd see a greater implementation rate as this becomes more and more stringent. But I think it's the stringency and the urgency that's required. I don't think that particularly your small and medium businesses are generally going to do this on their own, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think it was a great point that you made, basically alluding to the fact that, you know, when there is top level requirement, when it's being pushed down, when it's being set as a mandate to continue to do business, those are the companies that you definitely see a significant improvement. But a lot of the companies, you know, they checked the box back in 2017 and they air quote got compliant, and they just haven't dusted that POAM off since then. And now a lot of companies are realizing, okay, and that's a, you know, great segue into the next slide. But it's a great opportunity for now. People can actually, you know, get themselves in better shape just by looking at what their assessment results were back then and continuing to work towards implementation of those things today.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think this slide doesn't lie. About half of our new clients are coming to us looking for further preparation. They've actually done the work since 17, and they want an outside view of what their posture is with relation to whatever requirement they have. The other half are starting from scratch. They may have been in DoD business for many years and just ignored it until they got a letter or a survey from their prime asking where they were. The one started from scratch, you know, apparently they're about on average, to be honest, they're 48% implemented. So it's not terrible, but I certainly worked with some clients recently, probably post this date, when we did this report, that were, you know, they have a router from, you know, they have a modem from their ISP. They're using generic and shared accounts if they have accounts. You know, it's pretty ugly in some places, while others, you know, are doing the best thing. I'm not sure that we captured it anywhere, but a lot of places we go, it's they've set up the network to work. You know, it's somebody that has the IT guy has 3 or 4 other hats in the company, and you know that they've set it up so that they can get their work done. Security was not, you know, they did not keep security in mind when they developed the network, particularly in the small businesses.
Absolutely, and we have discovered, you know, in working with companies, a lot of these things are a challenge, but they did not create. This is, you know, this is not a prescriptive thing where you have to do absolutely specific things. In many cases, you just determine what it is that you're going to do, and then you do what you say you're going to do. Of course, you can't say, I'm not going to get compliant. You know, that's not an option. But as long as you put a good plan in place and actively work towards getting compliant, you'll be fine. And of course, that's a great segue into where we're going. You know, the self-attestation days are coming to a close, and now enter, drum roll, the cybersecurity maturity model framework or certification. It's going to change things as we know it, Colin.
It really is. You know, I think we all have our opinions on it, but it's absolutely necessary. You know, I think we've said a couple of times, there's got to be a forcing action, and this is going to be it. There may be some changes and everything else as it goes along, but certainly without this forcing action, I think we've seen that most businesses, you know, particularly the small and medium businesses, are going to be loath to expend those resources to meet all the requirements.
Absolutely. You know, so it's going to be fun, you know, and that feeds into, I don't think there's a ton to say other than how do you get there from here?
You know, go ahead, Alexi.
I was just going to, it's a big one. And one of the things you alluded to earlier, you know, the support from the primes, the support from the Department of Defense. I know that we work with a lot of subcontractors who are receiving messages from the primes, who are talking to them about what they need to do, not naming primes, but some primes are offering webinars and symposiums, to help them talk through what some of the requirements mean and to talk to them about some of the products that they can use to try to implement things. Some of the primes are ingesting subcontractors into their environment to keep the data off of the subcontractors. So that is a major, major thing that's really going to help a lot of the, for lack of better terms, the mom and pop shops to be able to continue to support the nation's defense through the proprietary products that they create. So it's going to be very important, for initiatives from the Department of Defense and from primes to continue to support what's happening, because in some cases, as you alluded to, some of the companies are not going to be able to get these things implemented. So that's going to be a big step in the right direction when there can be a support base out there for them, starting at the top.
Absolutely. And one of the things I've heard, and Rob mentioned it earlier, is, would 171 stop the SolarWinds attack? I'll ask you that, Alexi.
Probably not. I mean, 171 talks about flaw remediation. 171 talks about continually doing maintenance. From what's understood is maintenance was being done. It just was a sophisticated enough attack to attack the quote unquote software supply chain, right? So how do you stop it when the supply chain of the software, the secure patch repository is hit? When something like that happens, it's super sophisticated. And I know there's a lot of attacks on SolarWinds, but SolarWinds was the company of the day, but it could be another big company tomorrow. So it just really serves as a reminder that, we have to secure all aspects of what we're doing, including how we're getting patches.
Absolutely. But, I want to make the point that, according to Microsoft, it took 1,000 engineers, developers, smart people to create the attack vector that they used. If those kind of resources were dedicated to have to attack any one dev company, I think the attackers would quickly run out of resources to use.
Right.
If we can form hard targets, it's helpful. We go back to the Target hack 10, 11 years ago. They didn't breach Target, they breached the HVAC vendor and came in that route. It's finding that weakest link, so they don't have to utilize all their resources. They don't have to spend months and years developing an attack. If we can get to that level, there's still going to be successful major attacks throughout the div. That's just the price of business. But the day in and day out attacks, I think, would kind of fall off if we can develop hard targets.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And I think the next slide here talks about kind of what we're alluding to, about forming partnerships and continuing to have companies work with companies. And I know that's not the essence of what this slide is, but when I see the word mentorship, having primes to be able to, provide a better support channel to their subs. I'm not saying they should do their work for them, but just giving them an opportunity to understand what the requirements are, because if you're a manufacturer of a widget A, that's what you're in the business of, and a lot of times you're small and you're probably not going to have an IT staff. Do you need one? Sure, you need one, but there are some other ways that you can get some of these things accomplished also, and that's where that support's going to come in at.
Yeah, certainly I've seen, whether it's, as you mentioned, primes kind of providing resources on their network. I've also seen a number of times where the prime or the partner or whatever it is will provide some resources to help them set up a secure network or provide oversight for it, and that certainly helps. Again, I think a issue I've run into a number of times over the past 6 months is there is no IT guy. It's somebody that's fairly computer literate that set up, a regular home network type environment for their business. It works. They have connectivity, but there's not much more than that, and it's an insecure environment.
So there is a question that is coming in from the crowd. Are there any consequences for a DIB company, and I've added in a word just for clarity, that fails to implement these standards? Are they going to continue to be able to bid on contracts? What's the stick? So one thing that It seems that CMMC is bringing about is it's a play or no play. You get a certification, you can play. You don't get a certification, you can't play. You know, kind of like a driver's license. So that's been the general consensus. But what's happening before CMMC is fully realized is there are a lot of prime contractors that are telling their subs, you know, at a minimum, you need to be marching to the beat of the drum. You need to be working towards compliance. And where we see that you're not working towards compliance, then we're going to drop you from our supply chain. You know, that's been the general thought that's been out there. So right now it's kind of a self-governance through the primes for the subs, but directly from the government. The biggest thing now is if you don't have that score in the SPRS, if you haven't done that assessment, you likely won't have the opportunity to continue to do business anymore.
Absolutely. Alexi, I want you to take a minute, because I know you're kind of our expert on this, is talk about segmentation and what that can do for a business.
You know, segmentation is probably like the ice cream for compliance, right? It's sweet, it's good, and it adds on weight. Okay, that's a different topic. But segmentation is really great, because if you can set it up appropriately, you can really reduce the complexity and scope of what's actually required. Everything in your environment won't have to touch, you know, any type of sensitive data. So if you can, you know, create firewall is a great word, right? Everybody has a firewall. Just set up 2 network segments now. Put your CUI stuff on one side, put all of your other company stuff on the other side, and you can really reduce the complexity and the cost in a lot of cases. Because you talked about MFA earlier, and many of the reasons why people may not want to implement MFA, cost, complexity, things like that. But if you can do segmentation, you may see some opportunities where some of the requirement may kind of shift a little bit, and you may only have to do it for your administrative users if you can effectively accomplish segmentation. But there are so many topics related to it. I didn't want to leave this slide that we're on right now without mentioning 2 things. One, if you are a small company, or if you're in contact with a small company and they don't have an IT staff, really a great answer for them is using a managed service provider. But there's also one thing that we've learned over time about managed service providers, and that's of the CIA triad, managed service providers are there for availability in most cases. There are some managed service providers who have a little bit more security acumen in their wheelhouse, but quite frankly, typically availability. Company needs computers and they need to be able to do this, and an MSP is going to help them do that. That's where a company like Sera-Brynn, and there are others out there, but obviously I'm partial to our organization, where we can come in and we can provide you some advisory services just to make sure that whatever your MSPs are doing will help keep you compliant, because it will be no fault of the MSP. There are a lot of licensing models and different pay structures where they get advantages in using certain products, but sometimes using those products can cause problems, especially if they're going to remotely access your systems with some of the cryptography requirements, etc. So, you know, setting up an engagement with a managed service provider will be a great win for a lot of the smaller companies. And then also doubling down and using a cyber risk management firm such as Sera-Brynn will also help to make sure that you can understand what the requirements are, because it's often difficult to implement something that you don't understand. It's kind of like me being in the kitchen and my wife says, "Hey, I'd like for you to cook some chicken cordon bleu." Well, I know there's chicken in it and something blue. At least I think it's blue. I have no idea. So you can't implement what you don't understand. So sometimes you need somebody to provide a good cookbook for you. But yeah.
So Alexi, just because you brought it up, and you know, not everybody on here may be familiar with the concept. You mentioned that MSPs, and you know, that's not true. It's not just MSPs. It's these folks setting up their own networks. You mentioned availability. What's the other legs of that triad?
The other legs of that is confidentiality and integrity. So confidentiality, keeping private stuff private, and integrity is that's a little bit, I won't say it's more difficult to explain, but conceptually, you want to know that this is the right stuff. If I say it's this document, you validate the integrity of the data, making sure that it has not been compromised, whether in storage or compromised in transit, things like that. But the confidentiality is a big one for the Department of Defense, because if you can keep it confidential, if you can keep it private, I try to stay away from using the word secret because of the connotation that it carries in the Department of Defense. But if you can keep things away from the general public through confidentiality, that's what's very, very, very important. And availability is not going to get you anywhere except access to the internet, where the hackers are looking for opportunities to come into your environment.
Yeah, so really we care about confidentiality.
Absolutely.
From a more narrow standpoint. You know, most places are set up to make, you know, you have to have availability to do work, and that's the route most people took, you know, starting off, and confidentiality kind of slid off, because that's hard. That's the hard side of it, integrity being even more difficult sometimes.
Absolutely. I do just want to mention there was a request for the slides, and if you look in the chat window, there is an email address. If you send an email to that link and request a copy of the slides from today, they'll be sent out to you. So we're nearing the end. If there are additional questions that you all have, please drop them in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them as we continue to move forward.
Okay, I threw this slide on here. One of the biggest issues I've seen across the board is, you know, we're using this term CUI, controlling classified information, and federal contract information. Have you seen that used very much in the industry?
As far as the markings?
Yes, sir.
No. It's a really tricky thing, right? It's tricky. So this may not be where you're going with it, but it's tricky for me because many times, you know, while we're working with companies and we're providing, you know, assessment related service to help do a gap analysis, through those conversations and through that exercise, we end up seeing documents that look like they're likely CUI. And if you ask them, hey, where'd you get this from? Oh, well, we got it from the government. And it doesn't always come marked when it comes from the government. So I'm not really understanding the little bit of double standard, so to speak, where the expectation is that a contractor would mark all CUI in their possession, but oftentimes they may receive CUI that has not been marked. So that's a little bit of a challenge. You know, it's hard to push back when that's a part of your ecosystem for your company, your revenue stream. You don't typically want to push back, but this is one of those times where you at least want to be asking the question, or you at least make a general assumption. If I got it from the government in support of contract A, I'm going to mark it.
And that's fair. And really, I think one thing that's missing in this whole process is everybody needs to work with their government or prime to understand what they're receiving. I haven't seen too much of that yet, where they're actually opening that line of communication to understand what type of information they're going to receive.
Absolutely. That would be the first question for me. If I was getting one of these contracts from the government and the DFAR clause is in there, or eventually a 7019 or a 7020, my first question would be, and I know the contracting officer may not be able to answer it, but there's a program manager somewhere. Hey, what type of data are we going to be exchanging here? You know, what is the data? Are we going to be figuring it out on the fly, or are you going to let me know, hey, this is the sensitive data that you need to be protecting on this contract? Because, you know, if I believe we did a webinar early last year on access control. And one of the things that I kept alluding to, and I kind of talked about it earlier today, you cannot secure what you don't know about. So if you don't have an accurate inventory of what you have, you can't effectively inventory it, because the way you can't effectively protect it, because your protection mechanism is based on sometimes on what you actually have. And if you have data that requires protection, you have to look at what your use case is. And if you have to look at, you know, do I need to send it to somebody who's sub to me or a third party? And if you don't know what that is, you'll get yourself in trouble inadvertently because you didn't even know what you had. But it's no excuse. So you have to understand the data that you have to make sure that you can effectively protect it.
Yeah, and we haven't hit it on too much during this, but federal contract information. I know there's some requirements to protect that as well, and I don't think that's really been understood yet.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that. You know, I was having a conversation with a contractor who is potentially going to be CMMC level 1. And one of the things that they mentioned was, you know, I don't understand why these requirements exist. And so that was the interesting part. Well, those requirements have always been there. They just kind of formalized it and said, we're no longer going to let you self-attest to whether or not you're adequately protecting federal contract information. But it is a weird term. I know it's that non-public information that's related to the execution of the contract. That's not necessarily CUI. It would be nice if they could put out something with a little bit more information to kind of help guide people through what that is.
Sure.
Because I advise conservatively, and I don't mean it from like a political place, but I advise conservatively. If you don't possess CUI, treat all data that you receive from the government as FCI. If they're sending you an email saying, let's go to lunch, treat it like it's FCI.
Just to hit on it real quick, because obviously there's a distinction. What level of protection does FCI require?
It's the basic FAR.
Yes, sir.
The CMMC level 1 is what it'll be. The 17 basic requirements, the cyber hygiene, as it's most often referred to, physical access control, username, passwords, antivirus, patch management. Yep.
Very good. Okay, great. And does that take us to the end? I think
that does take us to the end. Obviously the chat room is available for any questions that may be out there. So we'll still be standing by during this time for any questions that come up. But we definitely like to thank, the FBI Norfolk Field Office for having us on and giving us the opportunity to present in this forum. We really appreciate opportunities to what we like to call is giving back to the DIB and furthering understanding through the knowledge that we've gained over time. So we'll turn it back over to those guys. And if you have any additional questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll continue to answer them until the conclusion of the presentation. One thing I do want to mention that has been kind of floated internally is that, just to continue conversation about CUI and the DIB. And, oftentimes contracting officers, they don't know what CUI is. So again, just remember, I hear it all the time. We don't know what CUI is. We're going to need some assistance. So just remember that you can always ask the contracting officer to ask somebody else. You don't have to stop with them. But I believe that the FBI is ready now. So again, we just like to thank them for allowing us to participate in today's webinar, and we'll kick it back over to them.